Hello everyone, I'm Chris from World Crypto Network, and I'm joined today by Megan Lords. How's it going?
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing great. Doing
So
great.
this video is kind of, I've been thinking a lot lately about peace. And last time we spoke, I said we have to do an interview together, a little discussion on the metaphysics of peace in an attempt to really kind of ask the what is it question. What is it? And how it can relate to the project that we're currently engaged with Bitcoin. And that kind of interests me. So all I've done really is just thought about this a lot. I did a little bit of reading and research and background to see if I could, get other people's thoughts on it. But this is going to be a very meandering kind of talk. It's not going to be very well directed because it's going to be more exploratory. I'm just going to push us up against some of the boundaries. And so maybe I can start with some thoughts that I had earlier about the way in which we relate to the boundaries in our environment. The knife is very much defined by its edge. And I've been thinking a lot about conflict and violence and the way in which we use boundaries to hurt one another. But boundaries are very prevalent in our environment as well, because they also show up in art, in the way that an artist will take a boundary and a constraint and turn it into a variable and grow out of it. I've been thinking a lot about science and the way it presses itself up against its boundaries as a way of uncovering truth, telling a story or a best effort attempt at learning the truth about the nature of our reality. And I read a few essays. I posted those in the links down below, metaphysical essays by Lloyd Warner. And he couches it in very different terms. He talks about peace, and he couches it in this way. He says, we are all at very different stages of personal development. And the fundamental question is how we relate to the cosmos. How does the small, how do my needs at my local level, my intensely local level, relate to the bigger picture? Now, the reason that's relevant is because recently I've been developing my presentation on how to introduce Bitcoin to new people. And one of the things I learned last summer when I first started doing it was do not start with the economics. Do not start with Bitcoin as currency. The reason is that as soon as you start introducing the economics, you descend into politics. Everybody has an opinion on how money should be treated. And fundamentally, you're not talking about the money. You're talking about who gets the land, who gets the food, who gets the resources, whose ideas deserve to be aired and explored and discussed in the world. What I found was that if you started with the network, fundamentally it's about describing what Bitcoin is at its core. It is a global dialogue with a memory. It is a timestamp server that has the ability to record a sequence of activities over time in a way that is unfalsifiable. It's unfalsifiable because it's based on the universal language of maths, those wonderful adjectives that nobody can disagree on. And for me, what that does is it gives us a basis. It gives us a foundation. No matter what happens in the dialogue, as you go on and you describe what Bitcoin is, and then you do eventually get to the economics when you start talking about the incentive structure, the way of aligning my private needs as an individual and the network's needs. When I get what I want, the network gets what it wants. You've always got the basis that you started with. No one's going to disagree with you that there are things called numbers. No one's going to disagree with you that there is a network and that we can transmit data over it. No one's going to disagree with you that there is a public ledger that can be made that can unfalsifiably back up those claims. So you've always got something you can go back to. And there's something very powerful about it, and I haven't reached a definite conclusion on what this all means. So, Megan, your thoughts?
So I think you made some really good points, and that's something that I like to bring up when I talk to people too, is, this is based on mathematics. This is based on these very concrete ideas that, 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is very basic and very easy to understand no matter who you are. But at the same time, you also have to bring in the kind of social side of it too. So a lot of people, your average person doesn't really think economically. They don't really think completely rationally all the time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does depend on the person. If you're talking to, say, libertarians or anarchists, a lot of them are going to have a more kind of mental-based approach to how they view the world. So when you're talking to someone about Bitcoin, I've found it's good to look at them as an individual and find out a little bit more about their background before we just kind of like rush into talking about Bitcoin. Where do they come from? What kind of worldview do they have? Because you have to talk to a libertarian differently than you would talk to, say, a socialist as far as what Bitcoin is and how it can be used to help them as an individual, whether you're approaching it from maybe a payment system standpoint if you're talking to a business owner, or you're approaching it from a social, socio-political aspect as if you're talking to an activist. So a diversity of methods, I think, is really useful in kind of getting to know someone as an individual and finding out what's going to work for them and help their understanding of it. Not everyone is irrational. We're not all rational actors. There's a lot of irrationality in our lives from day to day. Even the most rational people find themselves doing completely irrational things. And while I think you definitely have to have that, because Bitcoin, I think, is a very rational system, and it very much makes sense because it's based on these concrete ideas, and that's kind of what brought me around to Bitcoin in a lot of ways. You also have the other side of the coin, which is the social impacts of Bitcoin. And I think that's especially useful if you're talking to someone who's concerned with activism and concerned with the state of the world, and they kind of can view the bigger picture of, what's going on in the world, what are some of the biggest problems we face, whether it's, imperialism or lack of equality, any of these things. If you're talking to someone like that, you do have to more appeal to the social, more emotional side. I think you see that left out a lot of times, and as you see the Bitcoin economy kind of growing, it's a really good thing because you're seeing more of these people brought into the fold. A few years ago, when I heard about it, it was a little bit hard for me to understand because I don't really come from a technical background. So a lot of the jargon I was really unfamiliar with, and it was a very almost like hyper-mental approach to it, which is great, and it definitely works for people who are already thinking in that mindset. But as it kind of grows and you see more people coming in, you have to use kind of a diversity of tactics to reach people and help them understand. So I think you definitely need both. You have people who, especially your more activist types on the left and the right, or even if you're not on that kind of political spectrum, you find out what social issues are important to people, and that's kind of where something like Bitcoin Not Bombs comes into play. Is if you're talking to someone who's focused on what can we do to help people, maybe they're involved in anti-war activism, you can use that angle. Maybe they're involved in how do we help. How does Bitcoin help charities? That's something that I'm constantly talking about because Bitcoin has been used so concretely in all of these very awesome charities who have directly helped people and shown these concrete results too. So
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts on it. Yeah.
No, I think you make a really, really good point about this need to listen to the other person first. I think you're absolutely right. You have to start with the other person's needs. From the outset. And often, like, I'll meet somebody and I've been thinking about Bitcoin all the time, right? Like we all do in this space. But sometimes I just won't bring it up. Like sometimes, and I have to kind of work at that. I have to kind of deliberately don't bring it up, because so if you just introduce it with someone for no reason at all, without really understanding them, then it's sort of like you're using that information. You're there to actually make the other person feel smarter. You're there to make them feel confident about their knowledge and help them to feel a bit surer. And so when you introduce Bitcoin to people, it can't be like this, look, guys, you're going to love it. It's got 21 million. It's got deflationary aspects. You can't do that because the fundamental assumption is that they must want it because I do. Like, I like this, so therefore they do as well. I think, yeah, if you learn about the other person's needs, I think sometimes it's about, what's that phrase that's used in marketing? It's listen to what people say they want and then give them what they need. It's kind of a case of that. And when we did the talk, Feathercoin went and did a talk at Hull City Council, it was very much a case of listening to their needs first and then kind of presenting it and laying it out, kind of pseudo-technically, giving them a good understanding of the fundamentals, not talking about the price first, mostly just talking about the network, and then telling them almost what you're doing is you're showing the price at the end. You're talking about the economics at the end, but what you're doing is you're showing them all the work that went into producing that price. So you're giving them the backstory. And that actually is very empowering to people. Like, people actually thank you for doing that because you're cluing them in. You're giving them insights that they wouldn't get particularly from mainstream media. You might do if you listen to Andreas, and you follow him on Twitter. Then you will be very lucky to get those kinds of insights. But if you're not following those kinds of people, then you're going to be clued out. I mean, Meg, can you talk then a little bit about the work that you do with Jason King? Because one of the most powerful quotes to ever come out of this space was from Jason. He said that since the introduction of Bitcoin, for the first time, one person has the ability to help another anywhere in the world. You can transmit economic value from one part of the world to another at near zero cost in near zero time. Talk about some of the work that you guys have been doing.
So he's the first person I interviewed for Bitcoin Not Bombs when Drew hired me to write for them. And since then, I've been a part of Sean's Outpost, kind of doing what I can to help them, help get them exposure as far as what we're going through in Pensacola. So Pensacola is a very far right-wing military town. We also have a huge homeless population, and this homeless population has been caused by a bunch of economic disasters in the past few years, and natural disasters too. We had a giant hurricane that came and wiped out a lot of people's homes. Construction workers came in to help, and they found that they were out of jobs after the work cleaned up, or after the work dried up. He had an oil spill that was terrible, and then the housing crisis in general. And nothing's been done to address these economic problems. So you have all these social problems that have kind of come out of that, and the biggest one being homelessness. So instead of directly attacking that, directly saying, well, we need to solve these economic problems and we need more support for these people who have been affected by it, the city decided it would be a better idea to hide that these problems are existing. So we have this mayor who's a former male model, and he's really concerned about aesthetics. And him and the city council decided it would be a good idea to ban homelessness by passing an ordinance that would ban public camping. And they said this was a response to the Occupy Pensacola movement, but I think this was more aesthetically concerned. He wanted to hide the growing problem because it's grown drastically in the past 10 years. Anyone who's lived in Pensacola can see the increase of people, on the streets who are asking for money and who obviously need help. So Jason came in and he created Sean's Outpost, and I found out about Sean's Outpost. My brother actually sent me this link on Reddit of Sean's. It was Jason saying, Bitcoin has reached $50 a Bitcoin, and everyone's debating on what it can be used for, but I'm telling you, I can feed 40 people right now with 1 Bitcoin. And then a bunch of people sent him Bitcoins, and that's exactly what he did. So this is a very intriguing idea because there are a lot of kind of government programs or homeless outreach groups that get funding from the government to deal with some of these, to deal with the homelessness problem. But in the same way, like, government stands in the way of, being able to directly help these people. So Jason, he started accepting Bitcoins. He started going and finding homeless people and delivering them food, like going into their camps, building trust, and just a very direct action approach. So what I've been kind of doing, I interviewed him, and I've been trying to spread the word as much as I can. Obviously, they're the most popular Bitcoin charity in the space right now, and it's really awesome. They're getting donations from all over the world because, like he said, you can transfer value anywhere. There are people in Germany sending Sean's Outpost money to help people in Pensacola. Now, the city doesn't like this. It obviously makes them look really bad, and even other groups, for instance, Jason was telling, on the panel we did at the Texas Bitcoin Conference, he was saying that there used to be 30 permanent shelter beds that the Waterfront Mission was using to, that homeless people could go use. Well, if they switched that to temporary beds, they would basically get a government grant. They would get more money. Obviously, that's not fixing the problem. That's making the problem worse. And they're also kind of angry with Sean's Outpost because there have been grants that have been tried to, given to us, and once you take money from the government, you kind of are on a string. You're compelled to sacrifice or compromise what your organization might be doing, because they're like, oh, well, we gave you this money. The government never gives you money without strings attached.
And it's not the government's money either. It's taxpayers' money.
It's taxpayers' money. So basically, Jason's doing all of this work without burdening the taxpayers. This is all just voluntary Bitcoin donations, and you're seeing everywhere they go to, you're seeing what they're being used for and who they're being used to help. So this, it's very strange too, because you would think that, okay, here's this private solution to this problem, and everyone should be happy because it's not costing them any money, and yet you're having all of this backlash from the city and the county. I think it's mostly because, well, it's an embarrassment. It's humiliating that this problem has gotten so out of control, and the government has stood in the way of helping so many people, that this private organization or this charity has come in and has delivered over 60,000 meals to the homeless in the past year. In St. Patrick's Day, it'll be a year that Sean's Outpost has existed. No one has done that. I mean, you're never going to see a politician who's delivered 60,000 meals to the homeless, ever.
Yeah.
So it's embarrassing, and it's humiliating, and they should be humiliated and shamed for it. Obviously, you're up against a lot more power and influence than what one small organization has. So what we're trying to do now is basically get billboards up to get people aware of what's going on. We recently recorded a commercial kind of talking that's being played locally on a fairly far right station that's basically uses Tatiana's Bitcoin jingle song, and then I'm basically telling you about, hey, look at all of these charities that are using Bitcoin to help people. If you'd like to know more, go to weusecoins.com. So we're hoping that kind of stirs some interest in people and kind of gets them thinking, because you have to have that social aspect coming in. Like, what can Bitcoin do? What can it be used for? Well, it's been used to help thousands of people through charity. And I think that's just it's a very heartwarming, feel-good story that you need to have. I jokingly refer to myself as a propagandist for Sean's Outpost and Bitcoin Not Bombs. And I don't mean that like derogatorily. It's just a fact. You have to counter the propaganda of Bitcoin being used for drugs and prostitutes and whatever with, no, actually, it's a lot more Bitcoins are being used to help people. And I think that's what people need to be shown. They need to be shown results. They're not going to believe that Bitcoin can be used for good until they see it being done. And that's the organizations that I want to be involved in, is people who are getting things done. Jason has displayed that, wonderfully. Bitcoin Not Bombs and Free Aid, Antiwar.com, all of these charities are, actually having results. And that's what we need to see when you have charities involved. Like, another point he was making at the conference was, we don't hold nonprofits to the same standards as for-profit companies. And it completely makes sense. Why aren't these nonprofits results-oriented? They get all these grants, but it's this kind of fuzzy gray area with where your money is going. You can send money to the Red Cross after a natural disaster, but you're not really sure where that money's going. You're not sure whose pockets it's lining, especially if there's government aid involved too. And along with the blockchain, you have this public accounting of where everything is going, and you can see where the funds are. And you have a lot of these charities too that are documenting everything and showing you, like, this is what your money is being used for. You can see it all, and you have to have that if you're going to convince people.
That's very well said. So I want to ask a question then. Why the hell does everyone talk about the price? Why is there this fixation between really, really, really intelligent people? This guy particularly, Alessio, has a great newsletter, and he talks very articulately about finance. Talks about risk management with your financial portfolio. Definitely somebody I would recommend. But there's this fixation with the economics and this kind of reduction to, well, it's all about the price. And it's almost as if, like, people just want to buy it and it has to go up in the next 5 minutes, or it's a scam, or something's really wrong with it. And everyone tells themselves this story about how they're going to buy at the bottom and they're going to sell at the top. Don't worry, I'll get the exit that I need. I will sell at the right time. And what this does is it pitches everybody against each other. This is actually the opposite of the foundation of the Bitcoin as a protocol, which try to align the incentives of the individual with the incentives of the whole. And actually, if you look up emergent complexity is based on 3 basic principles: separation, alignment, cohesion. The present moment is defined by our ability to discern coexistence in space. Right? Space is coexistence, lots of things existing at the same time. You have to be able to separate yourself from your environment, and you have to be able to align yourself with that environment. And I suppose, like Socrates' definition of justice, right, that it's everybody just minding their own business, not interfering in other people's affairs, and not trying to. This is the problem with the current state of interventionism we have in our governments, where we love to interfere. It's almost like a kind of nascent intelligence by the network. The network thinks it's intelligent about the node, but of course, like we were saying in the green room before we came on, we were talking about Tolstoy's War and Peace in the second epilogue. He talks about the relationship between necessity and consciousness. The problem is the network doesn't have the present experience. It doesn't have the sequence of activities that brought about its very existence. By the time it's aware of itself, it's already too late. The sequence of activities that went into the building up of the network itself are already in the past. So you're never going to get there. And this is the problem that I see with dictatorships. And in fact, I'd even class a lot of our democracies as dictatorships, as parliamentary dictatorships, right? Because this is the problem that I think you guys are facing in Pensacola, is that homeless people don't vote. And therefore, politicians don't care. Because in democracies that we currently have at the moment, there's all this emphasis on voting, right? And the voting only takes place like every 4 years, despite the fact that information travels over geospatial boundaries a hell of a lot faster. I mean, orders of magnitude faster than it used to. The people on the ground now have access that you don't have to learn just in case anymore. You learn just in time. You've got infinite accessibility, pretty much, not infinite, but you know what I mean, a wealth of access to information at your disposal anytime. It's called Google. In fact, if you walk into most modern offices today and you hang around for any longer than 5 minutes, you will see people looking up their jobs on Google, as in looking up how to do their jobs, especially IT guys. IT guys use Google all the time. And it's not because they don't know how to do their job, because I think fundamentally what makes someone good at their job is their ability to own it and their ability to take responsibility for that position. I totally understand why an IT person would defer to Google, because what's the point in him learning things or her learning things that they may never need to use? So given that we have this wealth of information, given that this information travels over space faster than it has ever done before, why do we need these elected representatives sitting far, far away with no access to my problems at my local level, when all they seem to want to do is get re-elected? So if you don't vote, or if you're going to end up costing them money, or not, and of course it's not their money, so they're not even emotionally attached to their funds, it's because they're spending other people's money, and particularly if they're reaching the end of their term and it's part of the constitution that they can't get re-elected into another one because they've had two, then of course they'll just kick the can down the road into the next guy's court, and they don't have to worry about it. There's no real accountability. There's no reason for them to do the right thing. And I wonder if there's a prescription for this. I mean, it's all very well me describing it, but I wonder if there's a basis. And I think what perhaps we need to do is shine a light on more of these stories about what Jason has done and what you guys are doing. Because if you don't use your platform as a conduit, as a way of shining a light on some of the better, more more benevolent tasks in the community, then all you're going to get is this kind of mainstream garbage. You're just going to get the superficiality, the small talk, the kittens and the babies on Facebook. You know what I'm talking about, right? This kind of deferment to like the mundane, the wishy-washy. I don't really want to have to think. And this is a friend of mine, Larissa. She's got a blog. Let me just go see if I can find it and bring it up. Where she writes so if you just Google histories of things to come, she has a post that she wrote recently called Time and Politics number 10, Police State Futures. And she reminds us that Plato predicted that democracy is followed by tyranny, that you can sort of get a tyranny of the majority. And I'm seeing that a lot, like in the startup culture as well, with people enslaving one another by saying, oh, join my startup, I'll give you shares, just a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet that don't really mean anything. It's just promises. It's exactly what got us into this mess in the first place. And I think what's important is that I think we need to be more self-aware within the Bitcoin community. I think we need to be putting more emphasis on some of the work that you guys are doing so that other people can learn and mimic it. And so other people can be inspired by it, actually. That's the most important thing. Because we're at a junction right now. This could go one way or the other. We could either use the internet as a powerful force for freedom. In fact, I think Andreas did a talk at one of the Bitcoin conferences. It was to do with Bitcoin neutrality. Try Googling that. That should come up. And so, yes, you have this idea, I think, came up in that talk, where we're currently at a junction. We could either use the internet as a force for good, and we could be autonomous, self-directed individuals, as Socrates saw it, like just engaged in my own busyness, engaged in my own affairs, or it could become a tyrannical force. And then I think what would happen, because we've seen this before, we've seen it with Nazism, we've seen it with this kind of despair, like I think what war is it's kind of a giving up on the future. It's a descent into nature and a descent into the violence of nature. The reason why I'm getting, thinking more about this recently is that nature doesn't really need us. And there's this kind of anxiety that we're kind of superfluous. Yes, we're these kind of weird witnesses that walk around and observe the world and then tell stories about it. But there's a sense in which it could do without us, that we're expendable. In fact, Robert Harrison at Stanford University has a podcast, a radio show at KZSU called Untitled Opinions. There's a great show that he did once where he talked about our relationship with animals. And he said, what is it with us? Like, we push these animals into life just to force them into death again. They exist just for our consumption. And it's this, what would be the worst thing in the world, I think, that could come out of this movement, as I reflect on it right now, is that we just replace one monster with another. That we try to kind of smuggle in certain behaviors and certain characteristics of our past, and we smuggle it into the future. And we do it under the banner of new technology. And we talk about the way in which technology drives social change and how this is kind of inevitable anyway, so you may as well sign up. And I would just give us pause for thought about that for a moment, because that is what's bothering me at the minute, is that you have this culture of speculation that only wants to talk about the superficial, and that's the distraction, right? That's what the people in power want you to think. Right. As we enter into this age of like futurity, like this kind of future, or like anything could happen next, this almost like approaching something called the singularity, where everything is possible simultaneously. People start making predictions, and this prediction culture grows and grows and grows, but our ability to anticipate events is notoriously bad. Like, we have a terrible track record as a species of being right over the long term. In fact, we're nearly always wrong over the long term. And what I think is quite pernicious is that this is almost, would you say it's conspiratorial? I mean, I don't know. I don't really buy into these kind of conspiracy theories just because I think they're more entertainment than they are, you know, factually driven. But I would certainly say that it's a distraction that's there to try and move your gaze, move your attention from what's really important.
Yes. So Bitcoin is a tool. It's neither moral or immoral. I don't think you can attach a moral value to Bitcoin because it can be applied to so many things. So you have this kind of divide in the Bitcoin community itself. You have people who are interested in making money, and there's nothing wrong with that, and they have made a lot of money doing that. So these top financial people are going to be focusing on that aspect of it. Your traders, your Wall Street people, they're going to be focusing on that aspect of it. But then you have the people who aren't in it for the money necessarily. They're in it for ideological reasons. They're in it for charitable reasons. So there's kind of been this weird, yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's a huge divide, and there's a lot of overlap with this kind of divide too. But what it comes down to is you do have to reframe the argument, because the media wants to look at it as this, you know, den of thieves, and it's this wild, wild west, you know, anarchic kind of situation where you put your money into a place like Mt. Gox and these people run off with it. And those elements are always going to exist in any society you have. So it's up to us to reframe the argument and say, well, yes, so these people lost money in Bitcoin. How many trillions of dollars were stolen by these Wall Street bankers? You have to basically hold up a mirror to these people who are criticizing Bitcoin and say, listen, you know, Bitcoin is not perfect. There have been hacks, there have been massive thefts, there's criminal activity. But that makes up such a small percentage of it. You wouldn't know that if you're an outsider looking in, though. So these financial people are outsiders looking in. You know, they're not reading the forums. They're not reading the Bitcoin media. They're reading the mainstream media. They're reading stuff like the LA Times that says Bitcoin is dead or something silly like that. So they're getting a very limited perspective on the potential for Bitcoin, and that's what I'm very much interested in, is the potential for the blockchain to even replace government systems that we've all grown accustomed to. And that's a very hard concept to talk with people about, because they're so focused on the past and how it's always been. So it's hard to, when you're talking with someone who kind of is like, well, it's always been this way, it's always going to be this way, when you're trying to tell them, no, it doesn't have to be. There are different ways that people can organize themselves that don't include these parasitic people in DC and the Parliament who are just going to suck the energy and funds out of others to redistribute to themselves and their friends. You have to reframe the argument. You have to say, okay, so there's some bad elements of Bitcoin. We have to be honest, too. When I say reframe the argument, I don't mean it, you know, disingenuously, to only focus on the good and completely ignore the bad, because the bad exists. You have to acknowledge that. So having an honest view of what the Bitcoin is, but same with the internet, you know, it's opened up an entire new paradigm of communication. But there's some bad stuff to it. There's totally some bad elements to it. There's no perfect system. There's nothing that's going to change the human nature of these criminals. But better it be criminals who are a very small percentage of a network rather than criminals who are at the top of the hierarchy running things. So yes, it is a bit of a Wild West, but I think that's a good thing. It allows you to be more accountable for your role in the network and what you're going to do and the kind of principles that you're going to push. It's a much more equal system just inherently, as opposed to the system that we've all been used to. And it's very much a mental thing. Not everyone is ready for the mental shift that's required when you start kind of introducing these ideas that, well, why do we need people to lead over us? Why do we need people to pass these laws and, you know, steal our money to fund these horrible things? Like, people want to talk about drug trafficking, for example, or money laundering through Bitcoin, as if it's the first time you've ever seen money laundered or drugs trafficked or anything. I mean, we have government agencies in the U.S. who are doing these things on a regular daily basis, and their actions are resulting in the deaths of thousands of people. But people don't care about that. It's strange that these people who tend to also be so focused on the price that they miss these other aspects of it, also want to focus on just the negative. And it's very strange, and it takes a lot of I think the main problem when you're talking to these people who are focused on the kind of negative aspects of Bitcoin is you can't ever make someone change their worldview really easily. Like, you're not going to do it in a conversation. You're not going to be talking to someone and then they're all of a sudden at the end of the conversation going to be like, oh wow, like I've totally changed my worldview on this. The media saturates people with bad information on a daily basis. That's what they're used to. It's what they're comfortable with. And in a way, you have to afflict that comfort. You have to shake them up a little bit and say, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. It's not all bad. It's not all good. But the good, I think, is obviously overshadowing the bad, and that's why I'm really excited about kind of a refocus on charities and a refocus on the good elements that are within Bitcoin, and it being used as a tool for good. Just like a gun can be used as a tool for good or evil.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. It's a tool. You can't ascribe a moral value to it, but you can show that it's being used for an extreme amount of good. And lost my train of thought there, but
well, no, that's a very good point, because what you're bringing up is this notion of affordances. I want to say William Gibson, but I might be wrong. Let me look that up. Came up with this notion of affordances with technology. So yes, of course, it's true that, you know, like broadcast media is a common example that gets used. Broadcast media is a top-down technology because it affords that kind of behavior. Because if you own the pipes, you control the message. Whereas the internet affords distributed communication. This affords the what's so-called many-to-many or any-to-any communication medium. So there are affordances. You know, I can use, you know, this mouse as a pointing device for my computer. I can also use it as a paperweight as well, right? And so when we invent things, and this is quite a sort of Heideggerian thought, right? Look up Martin Heidegger. He has this notion that we are thrown into existence, that when we're born, we are thrown into a world that already has language, that already has tools, that already comes embedded. We are born into a middle, as it were. We're born into the middle of a story. And the way in which the young integrate themselves into a world and pick things up in a very different way, I think, to the way their parents and the older generations intended them to be used for. And I think that there's a lot that the older generations can learn, you know, from the young. But now think about this. This is something else that Heidegger talks about with his notion of truth and aletheia. He takes the classical Greek concept. He says, well, look, there is a way in which I coexist with the past. Because when I sit on this chair, for example, I share the very same intention of the person who invented the chair. When the first person came along and said, okay, I have a certain, what Heidegger would call an in order to, okay, or my forsake of which, okay, I'm going to use this stump of wood and this old tree in order to sit down for the sake of being comfortable, right? And what you're doing is you are looking around you, you're uncomfortable, you've been standing for a long time, you've been walking for a long time, and everything reveals itself in its capacity to satiate or satisfy that desire to rest, okay? But then someone comes along and says, well, what if we could commodify this? I mean, this isn't what they're thinking literally, I'm just kind of, you know, constructing this a little bit. They want to know, can I make this chair? Can I make this thing that has the property of chairness? And when I sit down on my chair, I share that exact same intention with that person. It's a way of relating through time to these other people. But you don't get what philosophers call the infinite is You don't get the whole of that invention until you have the fullness of time, until you've seen a range of different uses. When a king first becomes a king, for example, it's a king as usurper, because you're seeing the introduction of the king for the first time, right? Mono architecture, a one architect. He points at a bit of dirt and says, I have the resources to command and dictate certain rules to anyone who falls within these boundaries, okay? Anyone who's born inside of these borders or anyone who comes inside of these borders. And then it's just potluck as to how nice or not nice this guy is going to be. But towards the end of the king's reign, looking back, the guy just looks like a lazy slob. The guy just looks like he's way too comfortable. And H.G. Wells has this idea that we are in a constant race between education and catastrophe. That in some ways, if you think education is expensive, boy, you need to try ignorance out, right? Because that is way more expensive. What you are doing is you are underpricing. How I feel at the moment is that we are underpricing social costs. But all of these loans that get passed around in the banking system and passed off as securities, right? What is a debt? A debt is just a promise that hasn't been realized yet, right? It's a promise that hasn't yet been delivered. And of course, what you don't know is you don't know the intentions of the other person, right? You don't know what that other person intended when they signed their name on that contract promising to deliver on at some future date. You don't know. And so putting a price on it and then trading it around, what the Bitcoin protocol does is asset backed. This is money or currency, in lieu of a better definition, that is backed against energy expenditure, that's backed against your opportunity cost. You could have been doing anything at that time, but you chose to mine. You chose to take your scarce resources and direct it at a network, a global, self-stabilizing consensus that agrees on the order of activities. You're fundamentally agreeing on a succession of events, in this case, the exchange of economic value at distance. And that is a revealed preference. Right? As more and more people become aware, our job, I think, in this community right now is to build an understanding and cultivate a level of understanding about the protocol, rather than just spreading the awareness, rather than just repeating the same old things. Because this is what they do in finance. This is the problem with high-frequency trading. Okay, what you do is you scan the media, particularly social media, and you look for the frequency of certain keywords. Okay, you're just doing a semantic reduction on the content over the internet. And if you see a word that just keeps getting used, particularly by the social influencers, the people who tend to have larger audiences who respond to their claims, then you buy it, of course. Because if you buy it and you can put your order in before everybody else's, just by virtue of it being repeated constantly, we'll probably see a rise in the price, right? It's just probabilistic. And I think this is the externalization of risk, fundamentally. That what we've got, particularly with double entry accounting, where you know, like for every credit there's a debit. Okay, we've been operating this since the Renaissance period. It was wonderfully, you know, going back to Heidegger's invention, from that point in time, it looked wonderful and it was very empowering. It meant that people could keep their own accounts, their own private ledgers. The problem is that whoever controls that record of events, what we call a blockchain, the one that's shared by everyone on everyone's computer, as soon as you download the Bitcoin Q client, first thing it does is it starts downloading every single transaction. Not every single balance, it downloads every single transaction. And then it will independently verify that transaction, because there's a one-way mathematical function, something called a Merkle tree, in the blockchain. Okay, so it can verify that those events took place independently of any other node, right? Because someone could have interjected, someone could have put some fraudulent claims in there. You could be joining a bogus network, for example, if somebody got a vast sum of nodes on it. And it's this idea of kind of radical transparency. Like, there's also a psychologist, look up radical honesty as well. Like, say something that is true, even if it's painful, even if you really, 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 really don't want to, because the fact is it's the right thing to do. Now, you can't tell the truth all the time. You can't tell every single truth you know. If you did, you'd go insane probably. There's only so much reality, okay, that one can stand at any one time. But you do need, I do think we have a natural instinct for what is important in the moment. And one of the reasons I think we descend into conflict a lot of the time, and I'm getting this idea from a book called Difficult Conversations, which was published by a group of researchers on the Harvard Negotiation Project. That's the Harvard Negotiation Project. They actually have a really good blog that you should look up. And I just want to read something from this. So they're talking about difficult conversations, and in this case, I think, and I'm going to have a thesis here slightly, which is that the solution to global violence is something like local peace, is something like achieving an inner peace, a peace in our thinking. I've also posted some links below in the comments section to some of these areas where I'm getting these thoughts from. I'm still in the process of synthesizing it. So here it is. The reason we try to avoid difficult conversations is because we fear the consequences. Why is it so difficult to decide whether to avoid or confront? Because at some level, we know the truth. If we try to avoid the problem, we'll feel taken advantage of, or our feelings will fester. We will wonder why we didn't stick up for ourselves, and we'll rob the other person of the opportunity to improve themselves. But if we confront problems, we may make them even worse, and we may be rejected or attacked. We might hurt the other person in ways we didn't intend, and the relationship might suffer. And I'm going to add to that I actually think, and I've seen many conflicts, in my experiences as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of the time that the conflict arises because people lose faith in their ability to agree. They think this is never going to end. They think that if they get into this argument, it's just going to go on forever, and they're never going to be friends again. They're never going to talk again. And I think this ultimately boils down to the fact, when I read the Bhagavad Gita many years ago, that this kind of really came home to me. I'm not a religious person, I just like reading things. But it was our biggest enemies lie inside of us. And I think sometimes what we do is we externalize the way in which we perceive our interiority. Like, we want to produce a world that very much mirrors the way we think inside. And sometimes, and I think in particular, and this again goes back to Tolstoy, because he refers to this numerous times in the epilogue in War and Peace, at the end. I mean, you don't have to read the whole book, by the way. There is this thing called Wikipedia. You don't have to read the early stages. I would actually just recommend you get the synopsis in Wikipedia and then just jump straight to the epilogue, okay? There's also, you can do audiobooks, dramatizations, anything like that, because there's some really good insights in there. Now I've lost my train of thought. What did Tolstoy? What was I just saying?
I'm sorry, I was trying to focus on like all of the points at once. Well, no, I definitely agree. So we have this fear of conflict, this kind of understanding, and I think a lot of people intuitively understand that things are not right, things are not at the potential that they could be. Yeah. So we have this understanding of human nature as selfishness. People may not be necessarily good or bad, but they are inherently selfish. At the same time, I think a lot of people inherently understand that they own themselves and that they have not complete control over their own lives, but they are able to shape their own destinies. So you have this kind of conflict coming up with people who live in a state of anarchy regularly. They're just not really, they just don't view it that way. And getting them to kind of like step back and say, listen, you don't need these kind of parasitic rulers over you. You actually make your own decisions and engage with people voluntarily all the time, every single day, every minute of the day. Your thoughts are your own. And there is this intuitive understanding and this urge to be free, too, to be free from these constraints, whether or not people always act in that regard. So this kind of, how do we talk to people? How can we get these ideas through to people? Kind of going back to what I was initially saying, the listening side of it, just understanding where they're coming from, understanding what language they use, and how you can use that language to bring them around to these other ideas that tend to be kind of controversial at first. So we have this fear. I'm very averse to conflict, for example. Like I am, on the second part of that Tolstoy analogy, like I used to be very afraid to kind of confront people about certain things, while at the same time struggling with this natural urge to want to be a gadfly and kind of like bug them about it, like and I used to be very kind of harsh in the way I went about it, especially when it comes to things like war, which is something, I mean, anti-war activism was some of the first activism I got involved in when I was younger. And growing up in a military town, you get completely shut down. You cannot bring up the military-industrial complex here without being violently responded to, like, or even, I mean, it's crazy the visceral reaction that people will have from bringing up the idea that something is obviously morally wrong as war, shouldn't be going on, that people should be actively engaged in standing up against this. So you have to kind of make them uncomfortable in that aspect, but you can do it with finesse. So there's this other kind of concept I've been really working on in the past few years, the soft tongue breaks the bone. So there's a way to have these difficult discussions with people, because at that innate level they know right and wrong. I think everyone knows right and wrong. You can rationalize your way out of it. Like you can definitely. I know several nihilists, for example, who they don't believe in right or wrong or whatever. But I know very few nihilists who actually live that philosophy, who actually go throughout their daily lives arbitrarily making decisions based on no kind of moral code whatsoever. I mean, like, obviously they're not. If you believe that things are meaningless, then I think the conclusion to that would be, well, why are you sticking around? But obviously people can rationalize themselves into believing these kinds of ideas, but their actions prove differently, I think. And people's actions in general, even someone who's gone to war and done terrible things, they still understand how to treat people in their daily lives and in their daily interactions. When you bring in the scepter of authority, though, it completely convolutes and changes the dynamics. So we were kind of talking a little bit before about why do the police harass homeless people in Pensacola? Is it part of this kind of grander conspiracy of control, or is it just PBA, people being assholes? So what I like to say a lot of times is, I'm not generally a believer in the conspiracy theories, like you said. I don't think the CIA or the NSA controls everything. I think a lot of these things on the local level boil down to the PBA. Just people have gained this little tiny amount of authority, and they exert it on people who are defenseless and are not defended. And this is the problem that you see with the homeless population, is people are going to be outraged if they see an officer, beating up a woman in broad daylight, or arresting that, for example, that woman who was jogging and she was crossing the road and they arrested her for jaywalking, and it was just like brutal and just, what is going on? This is obviously insane, and people were outraged by it. And people are outraged when, someone shoots like a dog, like a cop shoots a dog, and you should be outraged. You should be completely outraged. But that outrage is lessened when you have cops breaking into homeless camps in the middle of the night and slashing tents and intimidating them and making them afraid for their lives, afraid so much so to where they don't even want to do anything. Like they feel so powerless that they don't want to speak out about it. And it's not a pretty thing. It's not something that's comfortable to look at and to really bring to the forefront of a discussion about human rights. I mean, homeless people have rights. They're people who have become temporarily overwhelmed with problems in their lives, and economic problems play into that. So when you're bringing these kind of ideas up to people, you have to approach it from the heart and from a humanitarian aspect. You have to appeal to the humanity that's inside them. Because I think even someone as tyrannical as, like, our sheriff, for example, has a heart that can be appealed to. It may be, under a layer of a lot of, ice, but there is that heart there, and everyone instinctively knows right or wrong. I believe that, the law of morality is written on your heart. You know it, even though you can rationalize yourself out of it, even though you can be brainwashed out of it. If you join the military, you have to go through a lot of programming, and it tries to destroy that shred of humanity that is in you. But it's never, it's never unable to be retrieved again. It just depends on what it is. What is it that's going to spark that humanity that's still in that person? So finding that out is the key to bringing up these kind of complex, difficult issues with people and being able to have civil discussions. Peace isn't, it's not this kind of neutral, everyone's floating on rainbows and everything's okay and no one ever fights. It's being able to have a discussion with someone that's difficult and that's heart-wrenching and that's painful, but doing it civilly and being able to connect with the humanity of that person and recognizing that, we both share this human element of compassion. And if you can just reach out to that, I think that's a huge key in bringing up the most difficult issues, and with finesse, with compassion.
Yeah, that's really good. In fact, Andreas actually tweeted out your comment about peace is not the absence of conflict, and I think that's so true, because the thing is that I think people have this misconception that peace is just nothing happening, and that's the opposite of what it is. I actually think peace is art. Now, I wanted to ask you a question. What if we got one of these law enforcement officers onto our show, one of the ones you were referring to, who tend to antagonize the homeless, take away their blankets, that kind of thing? What would they say if we were to question them on their motives, do you think?
Well, they'd be outside of their comfort zone. They're used to engaging in the public in a different power dynamic than if you were to bring them onto your territory, which would be like a Google Hangout where you were the administrator. So when they recognize that there's this discrepancy in the power dynamic, it makes them feel threatened. And I think that depending on the person, there can be a really visceral reaction of, oh, these people are just trying to mock me or make fun of me, or they're completely misunderstanding my position. You see it all the time. If you ever go to copblock.org, you can see all of the comments from various police brutality posts saying, oh, well, you don't understand what the officer's going through. They're risking their lives. They're putting their lives on the line every day to protect you. You see the exact same arguments that come from, I think a lot of it is kind of programmed into you through the schooling system, this kind of idea of this false authority, this authority that is made possible through physical items such as a badge and a uniform. And it's like you have no right to question that. Well, you always have a right to question that, but the people who question that are seen as instigators and agitators, and they're seen as, oh, well, they're just not respectful. So it's very difficult to have a respectful conversation with someone who's entrenched in a power dynamic that makes them think that they don't have to give you the time of day and they don't have to listen to you. So changing that and trying to bring them outside of their comfort zone into an area where the power dynamic is shifted in your direction, I think can be contentious for them, whether or not that's the intention. So we were talking about intentions, and it's hard to know intentions. It's impossible to know intentions. They're already on the defensive, especially if they're in the uniform, they're in the mindset, they're trained to view people as the enemy, to view your average person who's filming them and just asking questions as the enemy. So that's a deeper problem, being able to undermine how we have conversations with people in different power dynamics. So I'm not sure how they would react. My instinct is to say they would react negatively. They would view it as an attack. And in fact, people do view it as an attack. I was at a city council meeting a couple days ago, and they brought in this guy because now Pensacola has been humiliated on a national level with the homeless problem. So they bring in this guy who's going to centralize all of the homeless outreach and basically try to build a camp for the homeless that are not... It's not the most humane conditions with what he's done in other counties. It's basically the city trying to save face. So he did a question and answer afterwards. His name's Dr. Marbot, by the way. Look into him. He's set up a compound called Haven of Hope in Pinellas County that is directly next to the county jail and run by the county sheriff. So these obviously aren't the people who, you know, should be running homeless centers, I don't think. But people were asking questions afterwards, and you had the whole city council, you had a group of city council members sitting next to him fawning over this guy, just like looking up at him as this expert. You know, he worked under, you know, Daddy Bush and all of this, so he's this renowned expert, and they're just fawning over this guy. But he was so good at evading questions, and he was so smug about just not answering basic questions that I was asking about the camp or about, you know, his plans. Like, I asked a very simple question: how much is this going to cost taxpayers to build? And the other one was, could you explain how large the penalty boxes are? Which the penalty box is, once people are in these camps, if they fail a drug test or if they're deemed somehow, you know, pernicious or whatever, they're sent into these penalty boxes that are very, very small. This is like a very tiny cell with no roof. It's exposed to the elements, and they have a yoga mat to sleep on, and they're not given really any kind of nutrition or anything. They're basically left outside in the elements. So I was trying to ask him specifics, and he evaded all of these things, and it's very indicative of how politicians and people in power over you view your average person. He was very dismissive of our concerns that we brought up. He was the answers he was giving. I will say he was a Hegelian master at getting out of these questions, but the way he did it made it appear as if he was the good guy and we were like the bad guys who, you know, don't want to help the homeless. So it's very difficult to shake people out of that kind of idea that this person coming in with all of these obviously, like, intuitively bad ideas for how to deal with the homeless population are actually bad, as opposed to, oh, well, maybe they're good, and maybe we can have this kind of synthesis of, we can have this centralized control and all, you know, all of this government money, and we can somehow make the problem better, when a lot of it's just going to be money that's funneled towards, you know, private organizations, you know, the public-private partnership thing. It's hard to reframe the argument. It's hard to get people to realize that these people don't have our best interests in mind. And a lot of people would say, well, the way to do that is you have to engage in politics, you have to go out and vote, you have to be aware of what your city council members are doing, you have to write your congressman and do all of these things. But people forget that since they're in this power dynamic, they don't have that reference of understanding where you're at. Their perspective is totally different. It's a completely different world. So if you want to get the people who are on the same level as you as far as power dynamics, not in the political system, on your side, you have to show results. And you have to make the clear argument that the people who are doing private charity, the people who are using Bitcoin to help people on an individual level, is effective. And not only is it effective, it's more effective than the government solution, which is literally throwing money at something and hoping it goes away, while padding the pockets of bureaucrats and friends of bureaucrats.
Correction. It's throwing other people's money.
Other people's money. Yes, exactly. It's never their own money. Yeah. So what is that? There's a quote about it too, just about spending other people's money. Like, if you're spending your own money, you tend to go for quality over quantity. If you're spending other people's money, quality is not so much of an issue. You're just trying to get, you know, the most, or I'm sorry, it may be the reverse. Sorry.
No, I think we get. Well, I think I get that. That's right. If you're trying to satisfy as many people, you're going to do the minimum level that you can to get away with it. Whereas if you're buying for yourself, yeah, you're right. You're trying to maximize your experience because you're incorporating that purchase into your identity. You're saying, okay, I'm the kind of person that has Apple iPads, for example, right? And that goes into the way you want to be viewed and the way you want to understand yourself. I want to pick up on something you said about the police officer. Yes, I understand that if we brought him onto this podcast, onto our territory, that naturally he or she might get very defensive. But let's say we took them onto a neutral territory. The reason I bring this up as a question, and I want to push it, is I'm wondering first what they're afraid of. But look, when I see somebody attack someone, I assume that they're angry because of something inside of them, not because of what the other person did. So my instinct is to think, okay, what is this person afraid of? And what is motivating them? What is moving them? They mean being moved by a sense. So I think there are two things that fundamentally move us: love and fear. Okay, you're either moved to love someone or you're moved to hurt them. In fact, someone touches you, they touch you for one of those two reasons. I would claim, and I'm interested because I think that we're all police now. I think that one of the things that we can learn from Satoshi Nakamoto's paper, and we certainly should not be fixating on his identity, that's the other thing. So do not fixate on the price, do not fixate on who he, she, they might have been or are, and let's look at what some of the lessons were, what questions were being asked. Well, one of the questions about the Byzantine general's problem in computer science is, I'm Byzantine general, I want to launch an attack on a castle. I've got all kinds of issues with latency because I've got to get my message over a distance. I've also got problems with loyalty that my regiment may not respond to. What is the one instruction I can send that will yield the right result or will yield the intended outcome? Okay, so I'm interested, and one of the things that I think Derek J from Peace News Now does really, really well in his videos is he shows up and reveals the way in which the police officers, who, by the way, have not necessarily earned that legitimacy. You said, like, they get given badges and then that's supposed to stand in for authority. But remember, these people became police officers because they passed a series of exams. They're not necessarily good people. If you watch David Simon's The Wire, the popular TV show on HBO in America about 10 years ago now, well, he revealed through verisimilitude, because he was a journalist in Baltimore, and these weren't true stories, but these were based on true events, like direct experience by him. He was a journalist in Baltimore, he used to go around with the police. He painted a picture that felt true, didn't need any kind of citations, but felt true, of where the police and the criminals were just engaged in a game of cops and robbers, where the police just wanted to catch people for the thrill of the chase of it. Not because they were executing some moral exactitude. That was not what the law was there for. In fact, he demonstrates time and time again that the criminals have their own judicial systems in their own world, that fundamentally this is just one group of people telling another group of people how they should exist and what they should do. And their only claim to legitimacy was they own the badge, because there was plenty of dishonesty. In fact, there was oftentimes more integrity on the part of the criminals. They would often keep their promises. Their drugs industry was very efficient. They had all these kinds of, ideal market conditions. If someone didn't do their job properly, they were shot. It was very, very efficient in that way. Almost hyper efficient, too efficient. Whereas the police were messy. It was bureaucratic. The right cop wouldn't get the right job because nobody wanted the job that was, difficult to solve or didn't have any leads. So it was then a race, like everyone would just leave the phone ringing, no one picked it up, and there was all these games where you try and stay out of the office. And then when it came to the prosecution, right, the prosecution would only launch a case if they felt they could win it. Had nothing to do with whether they thought it could win them. And then of course the city, the governor's office would get involved, and they would want you to do some drugs bust just because it would score political points, just because it was an election year. It had nothing to do with actually stopping the problem, and just all about maintaining the appearance. And what Derek J does, to come back to my original gambit, was that he exposes the way in which the police officers are not, as Aristotle would say, not responding to the unique situation in the unique way. What they are doing is they're carrying around a rule book in their head that they learned when they did their exams, and apparently when this happens, this is how you're meant to behave. If this, then that. And it's this kind of I think it's this sort of lack of responsibility. They don't want to be responsible for their actions. And the way they avoid taking that responsibility is by deferring to the rule book. They just think, okay, well, this is what the rule says. I did my job, okay? It's CYA, cover your ass, okay? I did everything as I was supposed to do. I defer to my line manager, to the guy above me. And so I don't have to be responsible for my actions. And so you have videos like the one where, you know, this police officer was giving out parking tickets, right? She could have been doing anything. She could have been doing anything with her time. But instead what she chose to do was issue financial penalties for victimless crimes, for something that had no real bearing on anyone, didn't have any downsides, didn't have any kind of negative effect that was discernible, right, on anybody else. And she chose to do that with her time. And I think the guy in the courtroom started reading out to her the Constitution, you know, the Bill of Rights, you know, the bit that tells the government what it can't do. Not that's actually kind of more important than the first bit. And she didn't know anything. And actually, what I was really intrigued by, if we find this video, we'll have to put it in the links below. Was the judge was just fascinated. I was very impressed with the judge, because the judge was just sitting there very patiently. You know, a lot of judges would get very, you know, kind of annoyed at this kind of behavior because you're wasting the court's time. Your courts cost a huge amount of money. You know, the law cannot stop time. It's not physics. It's not that type of law, right? It's the laws we have control over. It's even like, you know, leaving. William Blattner, the philosopher, uses this in one of his book on temporal idealism by Heidegger, in case you're looking for a citation, where he says that we come up with these social constructs where if I leave some money on the table, say, for the waiter, there is this invisible boundary that nobody but the waiter can pick this up. Right? You can't just go there and just like take that money. There's this kind of way in which we set up these informal social contracts. It's almost like the rules of jazz, where there are loads and loads and loads of rules in jazz, right? And just like there are lots and lots of rules in society that just prevent us. But these are social rules. These are human laws. And what that means is that they are breakable by default. They are necessarily historical actions. And by the time you engage in solving them, they've already been committed. They have to have been committed, okay? And so I think that what he does is, Jay really, really shows up this kind of lack of authenticity on the part of the police, that they really are, and in the UK at the moment we have this because we've had a series of corruption investigations recently going back over a few years. We had the riots in London back in 2011, and what this has led to is this question of legitimacy, right? What king is legitimate? And I've actually noticed the police out in London handing out flyers, marketing flyers, right? The police are marketing because they're running a business just like any other business. Okay, the business model might be a bit not very good, might not be working very well. And they're handing out flyers that justifying their actions. The reason why you're seeing so many CCTV cameras is because of this reason, and the reason why you're seeing more police on the streets is because of this, and it's all to do with terrorism. Apparently, there's this like foreign enemy far, far away, and I do wonder what would happen if we were able to engage with one of these police officers on neutral territory that wasn't going to give them a sense of blaming, wasn't going to make them feel threatened. I wonder what they would say. I wonder what their defense would be. Are they attacking these homeless people because there's something in them that they fear? Is that part of the problem?
I think so. Everyone, I think, you know, understands that given the economic situation, that they may be one paycheck away from being homeless. So these homeless people who have fallen through the cracks of the system, they represent that fear that they could be there. And it is that understanding on a deep level that they are so close to being there themselves. We all are. All it takes is one traumatic event, financial or not, for someone to, you know, lose their mind about something. A lot of the people I interviewed, they've gone through traumatic circumstances. These aren't people who grew up poor necessarily and were never able to get ahead in life. These are people who used to be like anyone else, going on vacations once or twice a year. They had nice bank accounts, they had nice cars, they had nice houses, but maybe their daughter got murdered. Maybe something terrible happened to them, and they fell into this downward spiral. And so you have this kind of illusion of authority with the police that gives them this justification for their action. So they have this rule book that they're able to play by, and that allows them justification. I liked your comment that we are all cops. That's true, because we're all looking to justify our behavior, whether it's having an extra cup of coffee or eating that extra donut that we know we shouldn't eat. We're able to rationally justify that. When you bring in these power structures that have existed for so long and you say, well, not only are you justified in doing that, but there's literally no consequences to those actions, it completely severs that tie between what you morally know in your heart is right and wrong and what you can get away with anyway because you've been given this dry procedural approach that justifies anything you do. When we are doing something we maybe shouldn't be doing in our own lives, we see consequences. If I eat that extra donut, I'm probably going to gain weight from it. If the cop beats up that homeless person under the cover of night, nothing happens. People don't hold him accountable. And even if people do, even if people get outraged, which they do in cases of police brutality, when you have people on the local level going to protest and saying, this is wrong, you can't just treat people like this. They're completely able to justify it in their own mind, even though they're at odds with their heart. Even though they know on that deep level that it's wrong, they're able to rationalize it and justify it because they can just say, well, I was just doing my job. I was just going by procedure. And you see this with a lot of different things too. A friend of mine used to be an EMT, and he was saying that like the only way that you can kind of mentally detach yourself from the terrible things that you see, like whether you're helping someone who's been in a terrible car accident or anything, you have to mentally disconnect and just go by the procedure. And I think that's what you see happening with cops. It's not that they don't have that human element of compassion within them. It's that they're at odds with it because of the structure that they've been placed in. And that's why having a neutral ground where you can address them just human to human is so important. You know, you remove the uniform, just strip it down to just the basic, you know, you're having a conversation with people. And I've had conversations with like plainclothes officers and stuff, and you know, they like to do things like everyone else. You know, they're not monsters all the time. You know, like they like to have a beer with their friends, they like to hang out and, you know, watch sports and do all of these things. So appealing to that humanity is so important, and trying to find a way to you know, where you can find this kind of neutral territory to, you know, reason with them and appeal to that's how you're going to get them to come around. I've tried, for instance, I was pulled over in Texas on my way to Phoenix a couple weeks ago, and I was going, okay, so it's the middle of the day in the middle of nowhere in Texas, and I was going 8 miles over the speed limit, which isn't very fast. The speed limit was like 75 miles, or no, the speed limit was like 80 miles an hour. So there's this middle, you know, broad daylight, no other car on the road for like miles, and I get pulled over. I didn't even see these guys coming either. I get pulled over, and I was talking to the officers. They asked me to step out of the car, and I'm talking with them. And it's like I could see it in their eyes, and I could see it in their body language and everything, that like they knew that it was bullshit. Like they knew that I wasn't hurting anyone, and they knew that like I was basically, so maybe I broke the law. I went, you know, 2 miles over what you're supposed to be allowed to do on the highway, and I tried kind of appealing to that, and I was kind of like, man, I wasn't really going that fast. There wasn't anyone else around. No one was injured, you know, trying to kind of appeal to that. And it's like there was a bit of a hesitation there, like they knew it, like, and their body language told me that they knew that what they were doing, just writing me a $200 ticket for something stupid and arbitrary, was like wrong. They understood that it was just crap and just like they're revenue collectors for the state. But they did it anyway, even with that hesitation, because they were locked into that mindset, this is procedure. I can separate what I know is wrong from what I'm going to do anyway because I'm justified in doing it because, you know, this organization gives me the special rights to do it to someone. So I'm
really worried about that. Yeah, I'm really worried about the fact that the way that institution called the police force, which is what we call it in the UK, attracts a certain individual with a certain set of intentions, maybe a particular past. I actually have harbour this secret belief that the police actually were just a bunch of kids bullied at school, and this.
I believe that too. Yeah.
I don't know. That's not true. You have to separate the practice from the practice.
A little bit.
not all police are bad people, and so on. But yeah, I think what I want to do, I just want to quickly draw people's attention to something that Roosevelt said. Let me see if I can get this screen share working. Okay, start screen share. This is a painting by Norman Rockwell, the artist. Freedom from Fear. Okay, I want to talk about freedom from fear, because fundamentally the law is not there to represent moral exactitudes. The law is not there to perform to the precise letter, because that's not the way the universe works. Okay, we are talking about a set of rules that we can live by that help us to navigate the ones we've got no control over. That's fundamentally what it's there for, I believe. Justice should give power to people. It should not be there to take away that power. At the moment, every lawyer in the land, every lawyer in certainly the developed world, is unjust because of their fees, because of the costs. It necessarily benefits a rich group of people. That, for me, personally, I would claim, undermines everything that lawyer does. Everything that lawyer does is unjust because a small section of people can afford it. Now, freedom from fear, as Roosevelt talked about. Look at this painting, okay? Now, what's happening in this painting, you see here this newspaper, and the way the father is looking at the children, that the parent's duty is to give the children the space to grow. And that means, you know, here he is, here's the father, he's got the concerns of the world on his shoulder, okay? He's fearful for them so that they don't have to be. He is giving them space to grow. And I sort of feel like the opposite is happening right now. That we are actually at the mercy of our fear, that we are externalizing that fear in the form of laws, and we are pushing every possible risk we face onto other people, people that are less able to be able to cope with them. I think that the role of a leader, first of all, I don't think leaders should want power in the first place. That should be your first warning sign. But the role of a leader is to give everything the people need, to give the people everything they need to do their job properly. Right? It is not there to impose. It is not there to regulate or to interfere or to think that daddy knows best. I just don't think that works. But I do think that one of the things that's holding us back right now in Bitcoin is, apart from the fixation on the economics, is this sort of accusation that Bitcoiners are a bunch of cultists, that it's kind of like Scientology. I hear all these different things kind of banded around, and it's just a get-rich-quick scheme. And I think what it is people cannot cope with this cognitive dissonance. They can't cope with the fact that on the one hand, yes, of course, you'd like to see an appreciation in your capital. On the other hand, it's also about changing the world, and it's also about helping people to transact globally. They can't cope that those two things can be true at the same time, and so they just refer to this kind of, you know, this reduction. But holding these kind of narrow-minded beliefs is exactly what causes a lot of the social tensions that we face. It's exactly what Roosevelt was talking about in his inauguration speech. I mean, are you familiar with this painting? Do you have any thoughts on it? Or you're silent. You need to unmute yourself.
I think those are some great points, and your kind of comments about the law, how it exists now, it allows the neurosis of the masses to be kind of forced on the individual. You have a lot of these, you know, anti-terrorist style, you know, kind of laws coming into play when the real terrorists are sitting in DC. So you have Bitcoin being framed as this tool. It can be really dangerous for terrorists and stuff like that, and that's crazy. But it's effective in that it puts that fear into your average person who is so afraid of these kind of external, you know, circumstances. And I think that fear is also being increased through the increase in brutality that we've seen among cops and among even like TSA agents. I mean, I don't know a lot of people, I don't know anyone who's driving down the road when they see a cop car that isn't, you know, a little bit afraid, and, you know, they tense up and they're like, oh, well, you know, I gotta, you know, are they gonna get me? That shouldn't be a natural reaction to seeing the police if you believe in these kinds of ideas of justice and stuff like. If you believe need a police force. When you see an officer, you should be like, oh, wow, this is someone who can help me. It hasn't become that. But that's a powerful tool to just, show anyone that the power structure is so flawed. So I think people have this kind of fear of freedom. Like they're afraid of the freedom that Bitcoin can bring to them, whether it's financially, whether it's socially, economically, whatever angle you want to go with it. It very much is freedom, this idea that you're completely accountable for your actions and that you can have this extreme freedom, just like the internet has given us extreme freedom in communication that has never been accessible throughout the entire span of history. It's truly groundbreaking technology that increases this freedom. And while there's a fear to it. There's a fear of too much freedom, even though there's that kind of inborn natural curiosity and yearning to be free. So finding that balance, being able to show people that, yes, it can be liberating. The blockchain is this liberating concept, but it, even though they're going to want to focus on the dangerous elements of it, refocusing on the liberating aspects of it is so important, because I think people at their core want to be free. They settle for being ruled over. They see that they're maybe powerless on the individual level. They're going to look at the way things are and be like, this is the way things have always been, because they've never been shown that they don't have to be that way. But they can be. It's totally possible. I think the internet is really the best example of this. Of when it first came out, there were all these people. This is just a flash in the pan. This isn't going to actually go anywhere or do anything. And it's fundamentally changed the way we interact with people. We can interact with people on a global level now. We can appeal to that humanity on a global level, because people don't want war. Like your populations in these other countries, they don't want to go to war. When their governments, rally up the troops and they say that they're going to go to war over something, in general, people are pretty pro-peace. They're pro, leaving other people alone because they want to be left alone. It's these governments who are waging war, and they're able to do that by stealing from the people. So breaking it down into terms that simplify things, and I think this is what Derek does really great with Peace News Now, is he simplifies the language. You have to simplify the language and say, listen, this, all of these procedural elements of government rule and all of this bureaucracy and all of the language that they use that's so convoluted is literally meant to confuse people and make them feel that they're inferior and make them feel that they can't really understand what's going on. They're like, oh, these politicians are so much smarter than me. Really, they're not. I think many of them are actually less intelligent than your average person, and giving them this access to power just brings out the very worst in their humanity. Davi is doing a really interesting project called Authoritarian Sociopathy, Davi Barker of Bitcoin Not Bombs, and it's basically going to be exploring how people react to brutality caused by someone in a uniform in a controlled area. And of course, we have these assumptions that, because someone is wearing a uniform, the person will be less likely to intervene, even if it's a case of unprovoked brutality. So changing this, it really does start from within, and it really does start on the local level. I think a lot of activists get burnt out because they want to attack the biggest things first. They want to end imperialism, or they want to end the Fed, or all of these things that are fairly unattainable, at least in the short term. They don't realize that Bitcoin allows them to empower themselves and take back control of their finances. So it's not so much a, I'm going to storm into DC and take back, the government kind of thing. It's, I'm going to opt out of the system because I find it morally repulsive. I'm going to take any money that I have and, remove it from the pool of, I call the US dollar the blood dollar, because that's what it's being used for. It's being used to fund war and imperialism and all these terrible things, because they're stealing it from you. You can call taxes taxes, or you can call them theft. You can say, listen, all they're doing is stealing money from you, lining their pockets with it, and giving it to other people. Bitcoin gives you an out, but it doesn't it's radical, but at the same time, you don't have to be a radical to use it for good and to just simply say, I'm just going to opt out. I disagree with the system. I'm just going to, move my money into something that's not, based on debt and lies and war.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I think everyone, even libertarians, can agree that taxation without representation is what constitutes the theft. That's the dishonesty. And there's a lot of other dishonesty as well. There's dishonesty in inflation. This is a very dishonest way it's a very cowardly form of theft, because you're inflating the money away slowly, you're stealing it slowly. I think we often associate theft as being like a very intense, violent act, and it's not. It can take place over many years. And Bitcoin, of course, is an opt-in system. You don't have to go in. And one of its most prominent features is that it's open source. That means the founder surrendered the right to control. He published the code and he said, okay, I do not assume that I need to have control over this. I do not need to be the owner of this. It means that if Bitcoin becomes centralized, if it ends up being owned by a centralized organization, then we can fork it and we can create our own currencies. In fact, I think currency is an intensely local thing. Another thing I think that comes up particularly, and perhaps we should say why this is also important, is that in that painting that I showed just now, one of the reasons why I think Rockwell chose a sleeping setting is that we are intensely vulnerable when we're unconscious. We are not, I think scientists often get this, the cognitive psychologists often get this wrong. They tend to fixate on our mode of being during times of consciousness, and they tend to characterize the human condition as that of being, consciousness is defined, by the way, as that which is aware of itself, right? In a way that it doesn't appear that rocks are, right? Rocks just are. They don't have a sense of being. They don't have a here-ness. They don't have a center. And I think that's quite wrong. I think we're very vulnerable when we're asleep, and it begs the question about the authority figures in our world, that we do necessarily need to know. We need to watch the watchers, that we need to know what they're up to. They absolutely do need to be accountable. That now that we've got this blockchain, now that we've got this public ledger, this radically transparent way of doing things, that really there's no excuse. I mean, one of the things, Tom's trying to get me to run for the Bitcoin Foundation. I don't know if I still haven't made up my mind. I'm going to decide in the next week or so. But even if I did, it would just be as a protest. It would just be a way of demonstrating that, look, I've got an alternative solution for how we should self-govern. Like, we shouldn't be talking about getting rid of governing. It's the governments as they currently stand that I think is the problem. We've allowed this system to become corrupt. I think all human beings will attempt to commit crimes if they think they can get away with it, if they don't think there's going to be an outcome. And I think one of the things that the internet reminds us of all of the time is that you will meet with the consequences of your actions pretty damn quickly now, because information just travels so fast, and that gives a level of accountability that I think a lot of, particularly the Luddites and the pragmatists, sorry, is it the pragmatists? The people that tend to adopt quite late on in a technology cycle, I think what they're missing is that we're already falling, right? We already jumped out of that plane. And I think some people are acting like they're still there, like they're trying to grab onto something. There's this intense need for certainty. There's this, when faced with complex problems, rather than try to break the problem down, rather than be like, oh, that's interesting, and be curious about the problem, try to learn about it, they respond by harking back to old tropes, or just trying to, grab onto what they were brought up with as a child, or what does your, political movement tell you to do, right? I see this a lot, like either in, like, I don't want to pick on them, but like say socialists or conservatives, okay? You see this all the time. They run back to their communities, they run back to their forums, and they say, oh no, I was in this debate with this libertarian the other day, and they said this thing. What should I say in response? Man, just think for yourself. Don't run back to your tribe for reassurance. Like, what are you supposed to say when a libertarian talks about the fundamental, like when you make something from nature, it's yours. How am I supposed to respond to that? It doesn't work that way. You have to think for yourself, I think. Otherwise, like from what you're saying, Megan, it's like we're our own worst enemy here. And I think a lot of these governments and these financial institutions didn't get there without our permission. I think very, very slowly we allowed this to exist. And I think that this revolution begins with a prosecution of the past, a peaceful prosecution of the past, no?
So, absolutely. So people are afraid of these criminal elements in society, so they've given authority to other people because they believe that these people can more adequately protect them than they themselves can. And that's reasonable. I think governments are going to rise out of various populations, and they can arise in a natural form. But people are kind of trapped in this mindset that they're only going to use the tools that they've been trained to think work. So in this country, you're told, in the school system, that you have to believe in the Constitution, you have to believe in all of these things, and these public officials follow this rule book that is totally based on helping you and keeping you free. And that the way in which you exert your rights and you take back control of your government is by going into the government, is by participating in the republic, and some people call it democracy. But the thing is, they don't realize that the system was never designed to help them. It's not designed to work for your average person. It works great if you're a politician or a bureaucrat. Like, it works perfectly if you get into these positions of power and you're able to launder this money, up to your friends. It obviously works for them, but it doesn't work for your average person. It doesn't solve these social problems. So I think when you bring in cryptocurrencies, it allows you to have competing systems of governance. And you kind of see this. I had an interesting discussion with a guy at the Texas Bitcoin conference about this, because he was saying that, well, what we need to do is kind of have this moratorium on altcoins so that we can perfect Bitcoin, so that we can make this, the best it can be and make it stronger and kind of protect it. And I'm definitely opposed to this kind of idea that we need to protect Bitcoin, that without that by doing a moratorium on, other cryptocurrencies, that's going to be the best way to strengthen Bitcoin. Using it and getting it out there and showing that it's useful will strengthen it. But there's room for other altcoins and other ideas and competing ideologies even. I'm more of kind of from, I guess, the panarchist side of things. I think people should be allowed to choose the government or system of organization that suits them best. And you kind of have this decentralized, experience based on geographic region. So maybe each altcoin presents a different geographic region. Of course, this isn't, in the physical plane. This is more of, on the kind of digital plane. So you have these different competing systems. Say, I'm okay with people being socialists. If they want to be a socialist, they should be allowed to organize their own commune and their own world, rules and bylaws and things like that. And maybe they have their own currency. Maybe they have Comcoin or something. And then if an anarcho-capitalist wants to build a capitalist society and be free from all of the things that they find wrong with the current system, they should be allowed to do that. And let's have these currencies that different people can choose, and systems too, not just currencies, but people can choose and kind of work along, with each other, and allow them to, because there are some people, a very small percentage of the people are anarchists, and it's very hard to get people to agree with a lot of the premises of anarchism and get them to believe that they can lead themselves. The thing is, you're probably not going to have anarchy because other people think there needs to be people in power to protect them. People want to be protected, and the people who think that they can protect themselves, I think, are completely right, but that's not the majority, and I think that's always going to be the minority. I would just hope for a future where people can opt out, take back control of their money, and use it to build whatever society they want to build. And then you have these people who are working alongside each other, and hopefully trading with each other. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't have an ANCAP society next to an anarcho-communist society, and they can't freely trade or whatever. I mean, obviously there's there are always going to be problems with that. You're never going to eliminate criminals, but we're focused on this very small subset of the population that we've allowed ourselves to give all of our power, all of our innate power that we have as individuals, to this overarching system that doesn't even address the small percentage of the population, and even so incentivizes them to become criminals in the political class that can exert their criminal behavior in an even greater scale. So when you kind of bring in ideas of cryptocurrencies to average people, I think that may be an interesting way to frame it. It's like whether or not they're libertarian or socialist or whatever they want to believe in, say, listen, like you can see, obviously a libertarian or a socialist is going to disagree with the current system we have. I think they both have, valid complaints with what we have currently, because it's this weird kind of hybrid of both, at least in this country. So like allow them to kind of opt out and decentralize and do what they will as far as how they want to organize their society. So if they want a government, I think that's fine. If you want an anarchic society that doesn't want to give authority to a government or maybe has a different system of governance, that's also fine. I'm very curious. Of course, I'm thinking really, really long term here. Obviously, in the short term, we have to deal with the power structures that have been entrenched for so long. But I have a very hard time, and I've I guess gotten a little better at toning down my frustration with people who were kind of using the, talking about doing the political system and getting involved in voting, because I view it as such an archaic model. It's so like 1,000 years ago. Like let's come up to the future, let's come up to what could be, and not only what could be, but what is happening, how the blockchain is allowing us to organize ourselves in this kind of non-hierarchical matter. Let's try it out. I mean, I'm all for, let's try something different, even if it's radically different. But like you said, the greatest thing about it is no one's forcing anyone to use it. So this is an experiment that's happening in real time, that's being proved that it's actually working all through voluntary association. And the cool thing about it is you're still able to voluntarily disassociate. We can come out and say, like, we don't support these, hackers who, hacked the Silk Road or released all of the personal information of people on Mt. Gox. We're able to, as a community, separate from that and strongly condemn that kind of behavior. So excuse me. So I think that's really important to consider when talking with people and just kind of getting them to realize the potential that could be, but that it's also practically being applied regularly, and that they should just give it a try. They're not forced to. They're going to be forced to pay taxes. And that's a great kind of, I think, foil to Bitcoin, is like, well, you're not forced to use it. You're forced to pay taxes. Your money is stolen from you, with threats of violence, with threats of being thrown in jail. But with Bitcoin, just give it a try. See if it works for you, is what I try to tell people. Like, here, I'll give you a little bit of Bitcoin. Play with it, see what you want to do, see if it works for you. And I don't think I've met a person yet that I've given Bitcoin to that later came back to me and was like, I don't know about this. I don't think it's that great. Here's my Bitcoin back, or I'll sell it back to you. Like, once they get involved and engaged in the community, they realize how welcoming it is. They realize that the majority of people, at least that I've met, are very supportive and want to see this idea thrive.
Yeah, I think that really well said. Really, really well said. I think we love to tell ourselves a story as individuals of how weak we are, and I think that's a very comforting story. But I don't think it's true. And one of the things that I think is in the fear at the moment in the general public is that we might be at risk of descending into chaos, not anarchy. Those two things are not the same thing. And I think they're worried that if you just let rip, if you just let every individual get power, get this kind of autonomy without any regulation or without any interference, that the whole thing will just descend into violence. And it's this skepticism, it's this constant questioning of what other people will do with their freedom that I think is a lot of the time directed at homeless people too. Like, I have a friend who's an estate agent, a real estate agent in the UK, and he says to me one of the main reasons that people go homeless in the UK isn't because they can't afford it, to get into private rental. It's because the private rental market is just so anathema, it's so hostile to their belief system. They just don't like the way it's this cowboy-like industry where you've got a bunch of self-interested real estate agents that only really just want to sell you the most expensive property they can get away with. And there's a sense in which a lot of the homeless are practically homeless. That means that they choose to withdraw their participation from that market just on like moral reasons, just like I do not want to facilitate you guys, I do not want to take part in this market, and that creates a lot of social division. But one of the things that cryptocurrency can do is it can give you accountability structures within your organization so that you do not have to engage with trust dependency. You are not at the mercy of trusting the other individual. And if only people would look at this technology in terms of its possibilities, instead of just approaching it like, oh, this is finished, oh great, what can I do with it? Oh, it looks really volatile because the price is going up and down. No, it's not volatile, because the price is a function of our estimation of what it is. It's us that's volatile because we choose the price, not the network. So anything else you want to say in conclusion to today's discussion? We've been going for some time now, I think. Let me just refresh, see what comments we've got. Where can we find you on the net?
On the net, you can find me at bitcoinnotbombs.com. I also write for Bitcoin Magazine. I'm involved with Sean's Outpost. I'm constantly keeping the news on them updated through Bitcoin Not Bombs. And yeah, I hope to be doing something on the World Crypto Network. I'm still trying to figure out a format for a show that I'd like to do. But every week I'm on the Bitcoin group also. And one thing I did want to add is we had a really good discussion yesterday about millennials and Bitcoin and younger generations and Bitcoin. And this is something that whenever you see all of this negativity about Bitcoin, it is a bummer. It sucks. It's hard to get people started with Bitcoin when, iPhone wants to kill the apps. That's awful. That's bad news. But what gives me hope is these younger people who are embracing technology. I grew up around a lot of this technology. Granted, I wasn't as into it as my younger brothers are, but now I very much am. But people in my generation and younger are very fascinated with technology, and they're very distrustful of the power structures that we see, especially banks. They see how banks have completely screwed them over, and also even college, at the university level, people are waking up to the scam of student loans and this kind of debt-based educational system that doesn't teach you how to think for yourself, that's just about making money for other people and enslaving younger people. People are getting more skeptical, and they're looking for solutions and new forms of payment systems and ideas that aren't centrally controlled, that aren't coming from their schools or their government or any of these other entrenched institutions. So that gives me hope. So I'm very, very optimistic for the future. I do get frustrated with the present sometimes, but something that I'm always looking forward to is how this technology empowers people and how it's going to empower the world, and how these younger generations are going to be a huge part of this. They realize what's going on, and they see that these ancient ways of resolving conflicts and dealing with problems are completely outdated, and that the dinosaurs are dying out and the younger people are coming up, and that's really, really exciting for me. So I have a lot of hope for the future.
That's right. I think it's learn or die, not to be hyperbolic about it, but you have to keep up with the pace of change. Is there anything, is Sean's Outpost thinking of scaling the project to other countries or other cities or anything like that?
Yes, so he wants to have it set up like a distributed autonomous organization. In Dallas, a couple has started a Sean's Outpost homeless outreach center there. They just started. He announced it at the Texas Bitcoin Conference. There's been interest in South Florida and a few other states and other countries, he's even told me. So that's definitely part of the plan. Jason wants Sean's Outpost to basically spread all around the world. And yeah, that's definitely going to be happening in the future.
Now that sounds really great. Well, thanks very much. I'm just going to conclude. I just had, as you were talking to me, you were just inspiring certain thoughts, and I would conclude by saying that Bitcoin really shifts the balance of power. For the first time, the whole world gets to be a part of a greater cause, something much bigger than itself. You get to have a meaningful impact in something that will not only have a geographic impact, but also an impact in time. Because fundamentally, this blockchain will exist forever. Those economic claims that you make in the present moment, that present moment that is yours and yours alone, that you stretch out, will forever remain. People will look back at your actions. I would say that one of our greatest enemies, in fact, as I've been listening to you, Megan, like one of our greatest enemies is rhetoric, and the way in which the people at the top will use language in a very clever way to try and deceive you. And I think fundamentally, peace begins with an inner peace. It begins by thinking peacefully. Listening to your thoughts and acknowledging the fact that they're not necessarily yours, that these things kind of happen to you, makes you responsible. Because even when we make promises to ourselves about our private ambitions, to break that is not to do so without consequence. When you break a promise to yourself, it's just like breaking a promise to anyone else. And that's one of the reasons we got into this mess in the first place, because we overcommitted. We didn't treat commitments like they were sacred. And perhaps in conclusion, I should say that really this ability to take part in something that's much bigger than yourself could be a step towards global peace. It could be a step towards a harmony, where we acknowledge the fact that not every instrument in this orchestra needs to play the same note in order for us to have unity. Okay, there is such a thing as just appreciating the multiple ways and diversities of being human. Right? We started earlier on about talking about boundaries. I think that the present moment is a simultaneous appreciation of contradiction. It's the ability to be able to understand and appreciate the dissonances and the contradictions in one present moment. And I'm really encouraged, but I do think that we need to do more. I do think that you need to tell your friends about it. I do think you need to listen to their needs. I do think you need to question everything. And do not just take everything that I'm saying either as being outright wrong or outright right either. You should definitely go away and question everything that's been said. I've posted links to a lot of the things that I've been mentioning, a lot of the citations. You should definitely do that. And if you have anything you want to say, you should make your own video in response to this and tell us what you think. So thanks very much for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you next time.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Bye.
It's awesome. Bye.